Before anyone noticed the way her hands were shaking, the question had already left his mouth. And once it did, there was no way to pull it back. The war room was alive with its usual controlled chaos. Screens glowed, maps pulsed with data, voices overlapped in clipped practice tones. Strategy lived here, so did egos. She stood at the edge of it all, half a step behind the others, uniform pressed, posture perfect, presence easy to overlook if you weren't looking for it. Why was she even here? That was the unspoken question circling the room. She was young, too young, some thought. Slim, quiet, eyes lowered to the reports in her hands like she was trying to disappear into the paper. The kind of soldier people remembered only after the meeting ended, if at all. The kind who got assigned tasks, not asked opinions. The Admiral had been talking for nearly an hour. Pressure was high. The mission ahead was ugly. Everyone felt it. And then, like a crack in glass, humor slipped in where it didn't belong. So, the Admiral said, glancing at her with a half-smile meant to lighten the mood. Cortez, right? How many confirmed kills you got? 10, 20? Or should we save time and say 0? A few people laughed. Not because it was funny, because laughing was easier than sitting with the tension. She didn't laugh. Her fingers tightened around the reports. The room didn't notice yet, but something shifted. The air felt heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. She lifted her head. Why did that silence fall so fast? Why did every voice die mid-syllable? Her eyes met the Admiral, not defiant, not angry, just steady, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. 43, she said. Soft, clear, final. For a moment, no one reacted. Numbers like that weren't supposed to come from someone like her. Faces flickered with confusion, then disbelief. Someone let out a breath they didn't realize they were holding. Come again, the Admiral said, the smile already gone. She set the papers down, slowly, as if grounding herself. The movement revealed faint scars along her wrists and forearms, not dramatic, not fresh. The kind of scars that didn't ask for attention but told stories anyway. 43, she repeated, but not the way you mean. A pen clattered to the table. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "What does that mean?" She swallowed. This wasn't planned, she hadn't rehearsed it. She hoped foolishly that the past would stay buried where she'd left it. But it was awake now. We were deployed to the Eastern Valley, she said, 3 months ago. Evacuation support. A few officers shifted. Everyone remembered that operation. The one that went wrong, the one that never made headlines. There was a minefield no one had marked, she continued. A landslide triggered by the first blast. Echo Squad was buried before they could call it in. The room grew colder. We found civilians trapped between the rockfall and the slope. No vehicles could reach them. Radios were dead. Weather was closing in. Her voice stayed even, but inside the memories pressed hard. The smell of dust, the screams that faded too quickly, the feeling of the ground trembling under her knees. They were old, she said. Some were kids, some couldn't walk. She paused. The silence begged her to stop, to soften it. She didn't. I carried them out, one by one, 11 trips across unstable ground. My hands were bleeding by the third. My lungs burned the whole time. She didn't say how she cried between trips, or how she begged herself to quit and kept going anyway. I lost count of time, she said. I just knew if I stopped, they'd die. Someone in the room closed their eyes. 43 people walked out of that valley, she finished. Alive. The word hung there, alive. I don't count kills, she said quietly. I count mornings I gave back. No one spoke, not because they were ordered to be silent, because they didn't know how to fill the space she'd created. The Admiral stepped forward, slowly, not as someone in command but as someone humbled. You didn't report any of this, she said. It wasn't my mission, Cortez replied. Ma'am. The Admiral nodded, once, then turned to the room. We joke too easily, she said. and we forget who's carrying what. No applause followed, just something heavier, warmer, respect earned the hard way. Cortez felt it then, the weight of being seen. It made her chest ache. She'd spent months wishing people would stop asking questions, and now that they weren't, she wished she could leave. Because strength, she knew, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It just showed up when it had to. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence feel heavier after she finished speaking than it had before she ever opened her mouth? No one dismissed the room. No one returned to their seats. The meeting should have continued, but the air was wrong now, thick with something unspoken. Private Lena Cortez stood exactly where she had been before, hands resting flat on the table, shoulders squared, eyes forward. From the outside, she looked composed, professional, almost untouched. Inside, her pulse was roaring. She hadn't meant to say all of that. Not here. Not like this. The story was supposed to stay locked away, folded neatly into the part of her that did what needed to be done and never asked to be understood. She had learned early that explanations made people uncomfortable. That truth, when spoken plainly, often earned suspicion instead of respect. Yet now every eye was on her. Why did that feel worse than being ignored? The Admiral cleared her throat, but didn't speak right away. She studied Lena as if seeing her for the first time, not as a name on a roster, not as a junior soldier standing out of rank, but as someone who had been somewhere terrible and come back carrying pieces of it. "Take 5, the Admiral finally said to the room. "We'll reconvene shortly." Chairs scraped softly. Officers filed out in small groups, voices low, expressions unsettled. A few glanced at Lena as they passed. Some nodded. One murmured a quiet thank you. Another couldn't meet her eyes at all. Lena remained where she was until the room emptied. Only then did she exhale. Her hands trembled now. She curled them into fists, pressing her nails into her palms, grounding herself in the familiar sting. She hated this part, the aftermath. The way memories surged once the dam cracked. The way her body remembered things her mind tried to bury. Footsteps approached. She stiffened instinctively, then relaxed when she saw who it was. Captain Morris, logistics, mid-40s, a man known more for spreadsheets than sentiment. "You okay?" he asked awkwardly. She nodded reflexively, "Yes, sir." He hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "You don't have to lie, not today." That caught her off guard. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "About the valley, we were told there were no recoveries." "There weren't," Lena replied, "not officially." He studied her scars again, then looked away, jaw tight. "If you need anything." "I don't," she said, perhaps too quickly, then softened. "But thank you." He left her alone after that. She gathered her reports and stepped out into the hallway. The building hummed with controlled efficiency, just like always. Screens flashed. Boots echoed. Orders were given and received. The world had moved on in the span of minutes. Why hadn't it moved on for her? As she walked, her mind slipped backward, pulled by the gravity of memory. The Eastern Valley had been quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. The ground was uneven, scarred by old conflicts and newer neglect. Civilians had been told to evacuate days earlier, but not everyone could leave. Some never do. The explosion came without warning. She remembered the sound more than anything. A deep, concussive thud that knocked the breath from her lungs and stole the sky for a split second. Then the earth moved. Rocks tumbled like water. Dust swallowed everything. Echo Squad disappeared in seconds. She remembered screaming their names into a dead radio. Remembered clawing at rubble with bare hands because waiting felt like murder. Remembered a child's fingers wrapped weakly around hers, slippery with blood and dirt. She remembered choosing. Because that was the part no one talked about. The choices. Who you carry first. Who you leave behind for another trip, praying the mountain doesn't decide for you while you're gone. She remembered the moment her legs nearly gave out, muscles screaming, vision narrowing, and the thought that cut through everything else. If I stop, they die. That thought had carried her through when strength failed. Not bravery, not heroism, just refusal. Back in the present, Lena paused outside the medical wing. She hadn't planned to come here. Her feet had brought her on instinct. The medic on duty looked up and raised an eyebrow. "Routine check," he asked. "Something like that," she said. He patched her up in silence, rewrapped scars that never fully healed, checked her lungs. As he worked, he spoke casually about weather patterns and supply delays, as if normal conversation could anchor her. "You should have logged the injuries," he said at one point. She shrugged, didn't seem necessary. He snorted softly. "You soldiers are all the same. Think pain only counts if it slows you down." She didn't respond, because slowing down had never been an option. Later that night, alone in her quarters, the adrenaline finally drained. Exhaustion settled in its place, heavy and unrelenting. She sat on the edge of her bunk, boots still on, staring at nothing. Pride flickered briefly, not in being noticed, but in knowing she had done what she could. Then guilt followed, it always did, for the ones she hadn't reached, for the moments she hesitated, for surviving when others hadn't. She lay back and stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the base. Somewhere laughter echoed. Somewhere else someone cried quietly. Tomorrow they would look at her differently. She knew that. The thought filled her with unease instead of comfort. Because being seen meant expectations, and expectations were heavy. She closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, and with it, the same question that haunted her every time the past surfaced. How many lives are enough to quiet the ones you couldn't save? Why did her name feel heavier the morning after than it ever had before? It followed her down the corridor, not spoken aloud, never directly, but carried in glances that lingered a second too long, in pauses that stretched when she entered a room, in the subtle way conversations shifted pitch, as if everyone had agreed to lower their voices around her. Private Lena Cortez had become something overnight. Not famous, not celebrated, something harder to define. She felt it most in the mess hall. The clatter of trays, the low hum of voices, the rhythm of routine, it all continued as usual, but she didn't move through it the same way anymore. She used to be invisible here. Another uniform, another face. Now chairs scraped back for her without anyone saying why. She hated that. She sat alone anyway, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the steam rising from her coffee. Her appetite hadn't returned. It rarely did after nights like the one she'd had. Sleep had come in fragments, stitched together by dreams she couldn't quite remember but felt all the same: tight chest, clenched jaw, the echo of collapsing stone. Someone stopped across from her table. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up. Lieutenant Harris, intelligence, younger than most officers, older than her by a few years, earnest eyes, careful tone. "It's a free table," she said. He sat, resting his tray down gently, like sudden movements might shatter something between them. "I wanted to say what you shared yesterday," he began, then paused, searching for words that wouldn't insult her with their clumsiness. "It mattered." She nodded once. "Okay." "That operation," he continued, "it's been used as a case study for what went wrong, but no one ever talked about what went right." She wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the heat bite into her skin. "Because what went right didn't fit the report." He studied her, then looked down. "You didn't have to carry that alone." "Yes," she said softly, "I did." He didn't argue. After breakfast, she was summoned, not to command, but to a smaller room tucked behind the main briefing hall. The kind of room where conversations weren't recorded unless someone wanted them to be. The Admiral was already there. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Lena sat back straight, eyes forward. The posture came naturally. Control always did. It was emotion that took effort. "I misjudged you," the Admiral said plainly. Lena blinked. She hadn't expected that. "I misjudged the room," the Admiral continued, "and the weight people carry when they walk into it." Lena said nothing. Apologies weren't her currency. Survival was. "There's talk," the Admiral went on. "Commendations, interviews. Command wants to understand why your actions weren't logged." Lena's jaw tightened. "I don't want that," she said. "Any of it." The Admiral leaned back. "Why?" "Because attention feels like exposure. Because medals don't quiet memories. Because the people she saved would never know her name, and that felt right." "Because it doesn't change what happened," Lena said instead. The Admiral watched her carefully. "You know refusing recognition won't make this disappear." "I know," Lena replied, "but accepting it won't either." Silence settled between them, not hostile, just honest. "You're scheduled to redeploy," the Admiral said finally. "Different region, different role." Lena's chest tightened before she could stop it. Relief and dread tangled together. "When?" she asked. "Soon." That night she packed without thinking, folded clothes, checked gear, rechecked it. The ritual steadied her. Movement always helped. Stillness invited thoughts she wasn't ready to entertain. As she worked, her mind drifted, not to the valley this time, but to before it. To the first mission where she'd frozen. She'd been 19, fresh, eager to prove herself useful. The situation had escalated faster than briefed. Voices had shouted, orders had overlapped, and in the chaos she'd hesitated just long enough for someone else to step in. He'd been injured because of it, not killed, but hurt badly enough that the guilt had embedded itself deep in her bones. She promised herself after that she would never freeze again. That promise had cost her sleep, it had cost her peace, but it had saved lives. Was that balance fair? She didn't know, she only knew she couldn't undo it. Before lights out, she stepped outside. The night air was cool, grounding. Stars scattered across the sky in indifferent brilliance. She wondered how many people she'd carried out of that valley were looking at the same stars now. Wondered if they ever thought about the soldier who'd pulled them free. She hoped they didn't. On the transport days later, she sat strapped in, helmet resting against the bulkhead, eyes closed. The hum of the aircraft vibrated through her bones. Across from her sat a young corporal, fidgeting with his gloves. "Nervous?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "First deployment." She remembered that feeling, the tight excitement, the fear disguised as readiness. "You'll be fine," she said, then paused. "Just remember, doing your job doesn't always feel brave while you're doing it." He looked at her, confused but listening. "Sometimes it just feels necessary." The aircraft lifted, the ground fell away. As clouds swallowed the base below, Lena felt the familiar pull of purpose settle in her chest. Not pride, not duty in the abstract sense people like to talk about. Just the simple, heavy truth. There would always be moments where someone had to choose to move forward, even when the cost wasn't clear. She didn't know what waited for her this time. She only knew she would face it the same way she always had. Quietly, and one decision at a time. Why did the calm feel more dangerous than the chaos ever had? The aircraft touched down just before dawn. No dramatic landing. No rush of urgency spilling into shouted commands. Just wheels meeting earth and the low hum of engines winding down. Lena opened her eyes as the ramp lowered, pale light seeping in like a cautious question. She preferred missions that began loudly. Noise gave you something to focus on. Silence left room for doubt. The new region was flatter than the valley had been. Wide stretches of scrubland broken by half-built structures and abandoned roads. The kind of place where things hid in plain sight. The kind of place where nothing felt accidental. She stepped off the aircraft and adjusted her pack. Different unit, different mandate, Her role here wasn't rescue, not officially. She was embedded as overwatch, recon, precision, prevention, a sniper when needed, a watcher always. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had saved 43 lives by moving toward people. Now her job was to stay far enough away to end threats before they reached anyone. The team was small, quiet, professional without trying to prove it. That helped. No one asked about her past. No one mentioned the war room or the number that had followed her here like a shadow. They evaluated her the way soldiers respected most, by competence, not stories. Still, she felt it. The internal shift. The weight of being trusted to make decisions that couldn't be undone. The first days passed slowly. Surveillance, pattern tracking, long hours behind glass and scope, watching lives unfold at a distance. Children kicking dirt, men unloading crates, women hanging laundry that snapped in the dry wind. Targets, briefings called them, potential threats. Lena saw people. That didn't make her weak, it made her careful. At night, sleep came easier here than it had back at base. Exhaustion helped, but dreams still found her. Not of the valley this time, of waiting, of watching, of moments stretched thin until they broke. On the 5th day, the break came. Intel flagged movement near a village at the edge of their operational zone. Unscheduled arrivals, weapons confirmed, the kind of setup that spiraled fast if ignored. Lena lay prone on the ridge, scope trained on a narrow road choked with dust. Her breathing slowed automatically, body settling into the familiar rhythm. The world narrowed to angles and distances and wind. Visual, the team lead murmured through comms. Visual, Lena replied. She tracked the figures as they moved. One of them laughed. Another adjusted the sling of his rifle like it was nothing more than an inconvenience. Her finger rested near the trigger. This was the moment people imagined when they asked about kill counts. This pause, this power, as if it were simple. It was. Because through the scope she saw a boy step into the road, too young, barefoot, carrying something wrapped in cloth. He hesitated, looking between the armed men and the path ahead. Lena's chest tightened. "Hold," she said quietly. "Confirm," the team lead responded. "There's a civilian," she said, "minor." Seconds stretched. The armed men noticed the boy now. One waved him away sharply. Another raised his voice. The boy froze. Lena adjusted her angle, recalculating. If she took the shot now, the threat would drop, but the risk of chaos afterward was high. Return fire, panic, collateral damage. If she waited, the boy might run, or he might not. Her mind flickered back to the valley, to frozen moments and irreversible consequences. She breathed in, out. "Lena," the team lead said, tension creeping in. "I see it," she replied. "I'm working." This was the part no one applauded. The waiting, the choosing, the responsibility settling like lead in her gut. The boy moved again, stepping back slowly, eyes never leaving the men. One of them laughed and turned away. Another followed, distracted. The window opened. Lena took the shot. Clean, controlled, one movement. The threat dropped without a sound loud enough to reach the road. Confusion rippled through the group, but before panic could bloom, the team moved. Fast, precise. The situation resolved itself in minutes. When it was over, the village remained standing. The boy was gone. Lena stayed on the ridge long after she was cleared to move. Her hands didn't shake this time. That surprised her. Back at their temporary base, no one celebrated. No one needed to. The debrief was factual, efficient, necessary. Later, alone, Lena sat with her back against the wall and stared at the dirt between her boots. She had ended a life today. She had also prevented others from being taken. Both truths existed. Neither canceled the other out. That was the part she struggled with. Not the act itself, but the accounting. How people tried to simplify things into numbers, wins and losses, saved and killed. She knew better. That night she recorded the mission details in her log, every fact precise, every decision documented. She didn't embellish, didn't justify, just told the truth. When she closed the log, she rested her forehead against it briefly, eyes shut. She wasn't proud. She wasn't ashamed. She was steady, and that she realized might be enough. Because strength didn't always look like saving everyone. Sometimes it looked like carrying the weight of the choices you made so others wouldn't have to. Outside, the wind moved through the scrubland, indifferent and constant. Tomorrow would bring another watch, another decision. She would meet it the same way she always had. Present, quiet, and willing to act when it mattered most. Why did the quiet after the mission feel louder than the shot itself? It crept in slowly, that soundless pressure. The kind that didn't announce itself with panic or fear, but with questions that refused to stay buried. Lena felt it as she moved through the following days, during briefings, during watch, during the long hours when nothing happened and her mind filled the space anyway. The team treated her the same. That mattered more than they knew. No sideways glances, no careful distance, just trust earned and reinforced by competence. Still, something inside her had shifted, not cracked, shifted, like a weight redistributed in a pack she'd been carrying too long. She thought about the boy more than she expected to. Not because he'd been in danger, he always was just by existing there, but because of the way he'd looked at the armed men. Not afraid in the way people expected fear to look, calculating, learning, absorbing the rules of survival without anyone explaining them. She wondered what he would remember later, the dust, the shouting, or nothing at all. On the seventh night, sleep abandoned her completely. She lay on her bunk staring into darkness, counting breaths that refused to settle. Her chest felt tight, not with panic but with something heavier, accumulated, like grief without a single face. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and sat there, elbows on knees, head bowed. This was the part she never talked about, the aftermath of doing everything right. People assumed the hardest moments were the loud ones, the explosions, the shots, the injuries, but those passed quickly. Adrenaline carried you through them whether you wanted it to or not. It was the quiet that tested you. She stepped outside, letting the cool night air wash over her. The sky was low and overcast, stars hidden. The bass hummed softly behind her, a mechanical heartbeat that reminded her she wasn't alone. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn, she knew who it was. "You're up late," the team lead said, stopping beside her. "So are you," she replied. He leaned against the railing, gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "You good?" It was a simple question, not loaded, not probing. She considered lying. Old habits were hard to break. "I'm balanced," she said finally. He huffed a quiet laugh. That sounds like something someone says when they don't know what they're feeling. She allowed herself a small smile. Maybe. They stood in silence for a while, comfortable, earned. "You made the right call," he said eventually. "Back on the ridge." "I know," Lena replied. There was no arrogance in it, just certainty. "That doesn't make it easy," he added. "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." He nodded once, then pushed off the railing. "Get some rest, we'll need you clear tomorrow." When he left, Lena stayed where she was. She thought about the war room, about the number that had followed her like a ghost, 43, a count she'd never meant to speak aloud. Numbers had power. They simplified things people didn't want to look at closely. They turned stories into statistics, pain into data. She wondered how many numbers she carried now. She didn't add this one to the list. The next mission came faster than expected. Intelligence suggested a coordinated move, quiet, deliberate, the kind that aimed to test boundaries rather than break them outright. Lena was positioned early, scope aligned, breathing steady. The terrain here was trickier, elevation shifts, blind angles, no clean lines. She adjusted, calculated, waited. Hours passed. Then movement. This time, the threat didn't come with weapons raised or voices shouting. It came in the form of a convoy moving too carefully to be accidental, supplies that didn't match the manifest, signals that didn't align with routine patterns. Confirm hostile intent, command requested. Lena tracked the lead vehicle, saw a hand signal exchanged. A hidden compartment opened briefly, then sealed. Her jaw tightened. Confirmed, she said, but they're not alone. A pause. Clarify. There are civilians mixed in, she said. They're using proximity as cover. That changed everything. Rules tightened, options narrowed. Lena felt the familiar pressure settle in, the one that asked her to weigh outcomes no one would see but her. She remembered the valley, the ridge, the boy. She also remembered something else, the lieutenant's words back at base about carrying things alone. She opened a channel, request alternate solution. The response came slower this time, reluctant, stand by. Stand by, always the hardest order. She watched as the convoy slowed near a cluster of buildings, watched people step out, some wary, some unaware, watched lines blur. Her finger hovered, but she didn't commit. Command, she said, voice steady. If we engage now, civilians will be caught in the response. Recommend delay and redirect. Silence. Then risk assessment. High, she said, but manageable. She held her breath. Finally, approved. Delay engagement. Relief didn't come, focus did. She adjusted her overwatch, tracking instead of targeting, feeding intel, watching patterns evolve. It took longer, required patience she'd earned the hard way. Hours later, the convoy moved on, exposed, isolated. The engagement that followed was controlled, contained, clean. No civilians harmed. Back at base, the debrief was tense but respectful. Questions were asked, decisions examined. Lena answered them all. Afterward, the Admiral's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes we joke at the wrong moment. Sometimes we simplify what shouldn't be simplified. That night, Lena finally slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but enough. In the days that followed, something subtle changed inside her. Not the weight she carried, but how she carried it. She stopped measuring herself by impossible standards, stopped asking whether she'd done enough. She had. She always did. That didn't mean the cost vanished. It meant she accepted it. Before redeployment orders came through, she received a message, short, unofficial, from a relief organization operating near the Eastern Valley. 43 survivors had relocated successfully, crops replanted, children enrolled in school. No names mentioned, no recognition requested. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she closed it. Because some victories didn't need witnesses. They just needed to exist. And as Lena prepared to move forward once more, she understood something she hadn't before. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing, again and again, to act with care when the moment demanded it. Even when no one was watching. Especially then. Why did it feel harder to leave now than it ever had before? The orders came at dawn, quietly uploaded to her tablet while the base was still half asleep. Redeployment complete. Mission objectives met. Personnel to rotate out within 48 hours. Standard language. Clean lines. No room for sentiment. Lena read it twice anyway. She sat on the edge of her bunk, the light from the small screen painting her hands pale. For so long, movement had been her refuge. If she kept going, the weight never fully caught up. But now, with the work done and the threat reduced to reports and probabilities, the stillness pressed in. She wasn't anxious, not exactly. She was reluctant. That surprised her. On her final morning watch, she returned to the ridge alone. The air was cool, the horizon washed in muted gold. The land looked almost gentle in this light, as if it had never hidden danger at all. She knew better. Landscapes, like people, could be deceiving. She lay prone out of habit, though there was nothing left to observe. The scope stayed unused beside her. Instead, she watched with her own eyes. No filters, no crosshairs, just distance and perspective. She thought of the valley again, not with the sharpness that used to cut her open, but with something closer to reverence. The memory had changed shape over time. It no longer asked her why she survived when others hadn't. It simply reminded her that she had. Survival wasn't something to apologize for. When she returned to base, the team was already packing. Someone handed her a mug of coffee without asking. Someone else asked if she wanted help with her gear. Small things, ordinary things. They mattered more than speeches ever could. Before she left, the team lead pulled her aside. "You should know," he said. "Command reviewed the last operation in detail." She nodded, waiting. "They're adjusting protocols, earlier intervention, expanded discretion for Overwatch calls." Lena absorbed that quietly. "Good." He studied her for a moment. "You changed things." She shook her head. "I did my job." "Exactly," he said. On the transport out, she sat by the small window, forehead resting lightly against the glass. The ground receded, turning real places into abstract shapes. Somewhere down there, people were living their lives, arguing, laughing, surviving, unaware of how close certain moments had come to breaking. That was the point, she realized. Back at the main base, the war room looked smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she had grown. The screen still glowed. The tables still shined. But the energy had shifted. Conversations paused when she entered, then resumed without awkwardness. The Admiral stood near the center, reviewing data. She looked up and met Lena's gaze. "Private Cortez," she said, "walk with me." They moved toward the windows where sunlight spilled in, just as it had that first day. For a moment, neither spoke. "You could have taken the recognition," the Admiral said finally, "after everything." Lena looked out at the sky beyond the glass. "I know." "Why didn't you?" Lena considered the question. This time, she didn't answer immediately. "Because I didn't want my worth tied to a moment," she said. "I wanted it tied to a pattern." The Admiral nodded slowly. "And what pattern is that?" Lena turned back to her. "Showing up, making careful choices, leaving places better than I found them even if no one notices." The Admiral's expression softened. "You know that kind of leadership changes cultures." "I'm not a leader," Lena said. The Admiral smiled faintly. "You don't get to decide that alone." Later, alone in the corridor, Lena paused outside the same room where everything had begun. The joke, the number, the silence. It felt distant now, like a chapter that had ended without asking permission. She thought about who she'd been then, how tightly she'd held herself together, how afraid she'd been of being seen for the wrong reasons. She still didn't seek attention, but she no longer feared visibility. That night she sat at her desk and opened her personal log, not the official one, the private one she rarely touched. She didn't write about missions or outcomes. She wrote about moments. A child stepping back into safety. A delayed order that saved strangers she would never meet. A team that trusted her judgment without asking for her story. At the bottom of the page, she added one more line. "I am still here." The next morning, she walked the base one last time before reassignment, past the med wing, past the hangars, past soldiers just starting their days, unaware they were crossing paths with someone who had carried a mountain on her back and kept going. No one stopped her. She liked that. As she boarded the transport, she felt something close to peace settle in her chest. Not relief, not pride, acceptance. She knew there would be more missions, more impossible choices, More nights where sleep came slowly, if at all. The work didn't end. It never really did. But she also knew this now. Strength wasn't measured by numbers spoken in a room full of witnesses. It lived in the quiet decisions made when no one was watching, in the restraint to wait, in the courage to act, in the willingness to carry the weight without demanding it be seen. As the aircraft lifted, Lena closed her eyes and breathed. She didn't need a count to define her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.